Hello, hope you are doing well and preparing well for your next coming interview. So in this video we are going to discuss about lot of good things which is helpful in your interviews as well, and which is going to be helpful in your day-to-day development as well if you are a front-end or UI developer. So as I mentioned in my last video that I have interacted with lot of front-end developers who recently got the job in some good companies. I connected with them at that time and I got the questions over the front-end development and especially with the ReactJS. So as I mentioned, companies started asking the ReactJS questions, and today we are going to cover the questions asked in the interviews for Flipkart, Microsoft and Paytm as well. These questions are really helpful and I personally observed that as well. So in today's video we are going to discuss about these 6-7 concepts which are really helpful into the development and the interview preparation as well, and I believe that we should practice these things before going to the interview. Maybe you are able to answer these questions and create the samples at the same time, but it is much better if you already know how to write the code and what example you have to present there. So it will save your time, you will feel much comfortable and confident, and the other person at the other side, the interviewer, will also think that he can frame the example on the go. So for example, if somebody asks you to write the higher order components or higher order function, and if you have already practiced that will be really helpful because you will not spend time in thinking at that moment. So in today's video what we are going to discuss is higher order components, higher order functions, useMemo and React.memo, which is into the React itself, and after that we will cover how you will explain the Redux to the interviewer in a more convenient and technical way, and if he asks you to write something into the Redux, how will you present that at that time. The other question which has been asked a lot of time in different interviews, like I have researched a lot and I found that this question is recurring again and again, and it is related to the React hooks, especially the useEffect. So we will cover that as well, and what are the replacement of the older lifecycle hooks which useEffect can perform in the examples as well. And then after that we will do a small quick example of city search example which I mentioned in my first video and asked into the Paytm. He asked me to do that into 8 or 9 minutes, and after all we will do a small example of the city search problem into the ReactJS, which includes filtering, sweet alert and some other tweaks in the example. So without a further delay, let's discuss the concept which we have to cover in this video. The first thing which I am picking up for this video is higher order components and higher order function, which is very common in interviews and in your day-to-day development as well. So what is higher order function? A function which takes another function as an argument is called the higher order function. So for example, if you have used the ES6 collections like map, reduce and filter, these takes another function as an argument. So these are higher order functions, right? And if you have already done the Redux part, so connect method, if you remember correctly, that takes two argument like map state to props and map dispatch to props. That is also a higher order function, higher order component. So it's same as higher order function as well, because one component takes another component as an argument is called the higher order component. I remember correctly, this question was asked into the Paytm. He asked me, do you know what are higher order components and can you give me an example? So I've already practiced that and I was able to do that instantly. So what I did is that I created a wrapper component which takes a header and a footer, and it takes argument as the content component. So that was working like if I am creating another component like suppose about us. So in that what I did, when I exported that component, I exported it like export default, and then I added my wrapper component. Inside that I wrapped my about component. So this way it was a wrapper component and a higher component because it was taking about or other similar component as the argument. So we will see that example in this video as well. So he may ask you, how will you explain the Redux to me? What is Redux and how you have used it? So you have to explain it in a very concise manner that it is a state management library and it avoids re-rendering into your component. It gives you the benefit that you don't have to be dependent on another component for the data access, or you don't have to provide the props drilling as well. That was the major issue into the earlier versions of ReactJS. So with the Redux you can avoid these things and it makes your application faster. because every component has access to the store, and they can directly get the value, and everywhere it will be updated whoever subscribing the store value. So it avoids the re-rendering, it avoids the props drilling as well. That was the issue into the React. So this is how you can explain it, and with the form of like the diagram you can quickly explain if you are able to open, or if you are already shared your screen. So there are like 4 things. Then you dispatch an action goes to the reducer. So action takes 2 things, one is the payload and one is the action type. So in the reducer you write all the logics which needs to be there, which can update the state, and reducer is the thing which directly connects with the store, and from the store who like whatever the component wants to subscribe the value, they can subscribe it. So there is no dependency. It is how you can explain in a very short manner how Redux is and how you have used it. And you can explain 2 functions as well, like map state to props and map dispatch to props. So these 2 functions returns an object. So when you write the map state to props, inside the function you write the return and you open the curly brace, because this is the syntax to like return an object, and then you provide a key and subsequent value as well. So the value will be the state which is coming from the store, and then you can use this key in your component as a like a variable, like props dot state, props dot first name. And the same goes with the map dispatch to props as well, because we dispatch the action, so that's how it is, and it also returns the object. It starts with the return and then curly brace, and after that we create keys, multiple keys, how many functions you want to return from there, and you can use it. So this is how you can quickly write the example as well, and we will do it into this video. And then he will ask you that how will you write the legacy lifecycle components or hooks in your latest version into the functional components. So ultimately he wanted to know that how will you use the useEffect, and what are the lifecycle hooks you can replace with the useEffect in the latest version of ReactJS. So the way you can explain it, useEffect can replace 3 legacy lifecycle hooks, which is component did mount, component did update, and component will unmount. And you should remember the syntax as well and the name as well, because they won't ask you directly this thing that how many legacy components useEffect can replace. You have to answer this thing, and we will do this. I will show you the syntax into this video in a very like short way. Now let's talk about the React.memo. It is released in React 16.6 version, and in the class components we were having the pure component and component should update, which helps us to like control the re-rendering of our components. So this React.memo is the enhancement which we can achieve the same functionality like the pure component and component update into the functional components, because that was with the class components, and that takes another component as a like as a prop, and so you can control it and check if the props has not been changed or props inside that has not changed, so you can stop the re-rendering of the same component. So this is how it is useful. We will see a very quick example of the same as well. Okay, so now let's talk about the hook, which is useMemo. This is used to improve the performance of a React component or React application. So there is a concept of memoization in JavaScript or other languages as well, which is basically to memorize the result, and so that you don't have to recalculate or redo the functionality or rerun the function and doing everything once again for the same sets of input. So we can take the example like you have a sum function which takes 2 arguments and returns the sum of those 2 values. So suppose if you are running that function by giving input as 2 and 2, so it gives you the result 4. So it will execute for the first time, but next time if you will call that function, the sum function, with the same set of inputs like 2 and 2, it will not like recalculate or retrouble everything. It will give us the cached value which is 4. So that's how we can avoid the like iteration and re-renders of the components as well into the React.js. So useMemo is a hook which checks if the state and props has not been changed, so it avoids the re-rendering of our components and the sections into the application. And for the quick summarization, we will check the example of the same as well in this video. Let's understand how we can create the example for higher order components. So I have created a sample file here, that HOC.jsx, and as I mentioned, I will be creating the wrapper component, which I also did into the interview. So this is the basic syntax of creating a component, and we can return another things in this. And let's create a div with the class name of maybe wrapper itself, and now the actual themes will arrive. So let's take the parameter, and this parameter will be the another component which we will provide into this component. So suppose we have already created a header component, and we have also created a footer component, because that's a wrapper component, and here we will pass our page component that will be coming as an argument for this wrapper component. And done, we are done with the implementation. Let's export it. Export default wrapper component. This is our wrapper component, and maybe we can call it as a HOC as well. And now let's create another component which we will pass. For example, let's create like const page, and let's return something random from this component, maybe a page. This is a sample component, nothing else. Okay, and we will utilize it inside the wrapper. And while the time of exporting it, so export default, and then we will use our wrapper component, and inside that we will pass the page component. So this becomes our another component, and this becomes the wrapper component, which is the higher order component. And because we are using it wrapper here, so we have to import it, like import wrapper from the location. So you can pass down the location here, whatever the location you have created the wrapper component, and you can write it down like wrapper.jsx. So this is how you are done with the example of higher order component in React.js. In one of the final rounds, he asked me to create an example where we can filter out the city. Maybe it may be coming from the backend, from the API, or it may be coming from as a contract. So I have created a sample contract here. So if you can see, I don't think I have to explain it from the beginning to you, and I can show the functionality to you. So he asked me to do it into the vanilla.js, which I created, and I suppose that something is coming from the backend, so I use the debouncing there. But then again, he asked me to implement the same thing into the React with the assumption that this is an array of strings with the cities. So we can do the filter as well, like Delhi, and once we will click it, further information will be available here. So I use the sweet alert in this example, and I created the same fiddle there. I added the comment as well, and this was really quick. And you can see the sweet alert as a dependency I have installed in front of him. And this same example, you can utilize it. I will drop the same link into the description of this video, so you can use it and tweak it as well after forking. And this is not well optimized because I have did something not very good here, so you can utilize it and make it better for your learning. Let's understand how useEffect will be used to replace the 3 legacy methods or 3 lifecycle hooks which we were using into the previous version of React. So they can ask you like how will you use the useEffect, and how will you implement the component did mount, or maybe component did update in the functional component. So you have to explain the syntax, and let's take it one by one. So useEffect is a new hook into the React which can replace the 3 lifecycle hooks of React. The first one is component did mount. So if you already know what is component did mount, so in order to replace this component did mount with the useEffect, you need to write this syntax. So we have to pass this empty array arguments in the useEffect. So in order to have this hook run only once when a component is mounted, we need to set an empty array as a hook dependency. So this is a dependency and this is a syntax, and this syntax is completely equivalent to component did mount into the React. The second one is component did update. So if something updates, like a hook like a state updates or the props updates, then a component did update hook was working. So with the replacement of that, we can write the syntax here. So you have to pass the variables as a dependency in this useEffect, like the variable 1 and variable 2. So the official documentation can be like, in order to have this hook run when the component is updated, and this includes the mounting as well, we need to set at least one variable as a hook dependency. So at least one variable is required when you want to implement the component update. In this case, variable 1 and variable 2 are passed here, so it is behaving like component update. You can remember the syntax. These are like quite similar. Here we are not passing anything, and here we are passing it. So it is the component update is based on these variables. And the last one is the component will unmount, which has been deprecated as well, and we can use the equivalent syntax of useEffect, and this looks like this. So it returns a function in the useEffect, and this we can also do. Let's understand it from here. So this is returning a function, and we can also pass the dependency as an empty array. Let's understand from this definition. So in order to have this hook run when the component is unmounted, we need to return a function from the hook. So we are returning a function from the hook. If we want cleanup function to run only when the component has unmounted, we need to set an empty array like this way, which we are doing here. So if we set one or more variable in the dependency array, cleanup will run at every re-render. So I think this is quite easier to understand. These are the three syntaxes you should remember in the replacement of the earlier lifecycle hooks of React, and you should know it as it is being used into the daily purpose as well. Let's understand how we will explain the Redux to the interviewer. So Redux is first of all a state management library which provides you the functionality where you don't need to interact or you don't need to pass the props if a component is residing into the least hierarchy. So in the simple terms, if you want to pass on the information from one component to another, and there are lots of components in between, then you have to pass and reach to that component with the help of props. So what it makes bad is that when you pass something, and if something changes in the props, then all of the middle components will also get refreshed. This is not a good practice. And if something gets changed as well, you can subscribe directly to the components. So with the help of Redux, we can avoid lots of re-rendering, and we can make our application a very in a very good standard or in a good hierarchy of the folder structure. So there are lots of benefits of using the Redux. If you are confused into the Redux, how we can implement it, I can create a separate video. You can just leave into the comments. So I can just quickly summarize what is the Redux. So from the UI, we pass the actions, or we initiate the action, and that action can be anything, like an event, like clicking the deposit button or the withdraw button. So in this Giphy, we are clicking the event with the deposit button. And if you see, I already mentioned that in the actions we pass two things, like type of the action and the payload of the actions. So the syntax is like same, and I can write it down very quickly to tell you that action is what? Action takes a type, which can be any type, like deposit the amount, maybe add the item to cart. It can be anything. And the another parameter is like the payload. Here payload is the thing where you can pass on the information, like if you want to pass on 10 or something other value or an object, you can do it. This is action. And if we talk about the reducer is nothing but a place where you write the switch case, and inside the switch case you check what is the action type. So you check what is the action type, and inside that you create cases. So first case will be what? It will be like the deposit, fine, and you can use the deposit. And what you need to do inside the deposit is it's up to you what you want to return from here, or what will be your logic inside it. And the same goes on in the switch case. So reducer is the place which directly gets connected with the store, and inside the store there's a different syntax. We import the store and we use it, like the create store, and we have to write it in our component. So the flow is similar. If you see, we are initiating an event from here that will be called as a dispatch of action, and here it is the event of deposit, and this action contains type as deposit and a payload of 10. And after that there are lots of reducers we have created, and with the case match, one of them will be executed, and it will like interact with the store here, which is the whole thing that contains the store state as well. And whatever the component wants to get the latest information, they can subscribe the same state from the store, and they will have the updated data. So we can understand the Redux in this form. and there are only 4 things into the Redux in the standard way: action, which we dispatch from the view, and then it goes to the reducer where we match the case of action type, and from the reducers we do the manipulation, or because it is immutable, we do some changes here, and then we subscribe into this component, or maybe the other components. Wherever this state is required, we can subscribe it and we can have the updated data. So if you want me to take another separate session for having the Redux, I think 2 videos or maybe the 1 video will be enough to do the Redux. It is the easiest part, I would say, to understand, and it is really important as well. As I already mentioned about the React.memo and useMemo hook, this is by far one of the good example which I could find over the log rocket, which is explaining the React.memo and useMemo and the differences as well, and the use cases, which is really important, because until we don't know the use cases for using these things, the interviewer can make you very confused. In the WazirX, I have given the interview where he tried confusing me a lot between these two, and I had to write the example after all to explain these concepts, and I utilized this blog, and it has the examples as well and the very good use cases. So I would suggest you to read this, and if you don't want to read this and want me to do a separate video for this one, just drop in a comment and I can do this, because this video will go so longer. I believe you can learn it from yourself, but if you want, I can do a very precise example of the same. Okay, so I hope this video was really helpful for you and you learned something new. I am also giving some time whenever I get it, and I'm taking these questions from different people, different websites, wherever these are being asked in the interviews. So that's how I'm creating these videos. So if you like this content, please share the video with your friends and colleagues who are preparing for these interviews as well, and even if they are into the front-end development, this may help them. And subscribe this channel, and drop your comments if you want me to cover some other concepts as well. So I wish you all the very best for your next coming interview, and don't forget to share your experience in the comments, and you can email it to me if you want to connect. We can have the discussion as well, and we can post it into our channel, so that will help others as well. Thank you very much and have a great time.